I want to ask you about the family history. So, can you take me to the beginning of the earliest of our family history and relay that knowledge to us?
Well, what I was told, and it has been written and documented, that the family actually began in Virginia when David Dorsey was a slave. He was born in 1861, and at the age of 10, he was sold from his mother in Virginia. He remembered her saying, "Please don't take my baby, please don't take my baby." The story goes that he walked 10 miles. He walked at 10 years of age to South Carolina, near Rock Hill, South Carolina, to live with his family. For the family he was working for. He was purchased by a gentleman named Dorsey, and so that's how we have the Dorsey name. And at that point, he worked for them until he was freed. He worked about 28 years for them until he was freed as a slave. And there in where he moved, the Dorsey family moved to Cleveland, Georgia, which is North Georgia. And so that he was freed there and he became a bond servant or a sharecropper. Uh, his desire was to get his 40 acres and a mule, and that did come true. He got his 40 acres and a mule. And in 1872, the price of acres went down to $2.67 for one acre, and he was able to purchase more than his 40 acres. He ended up with 200 acres of land at the foot of Mount Yonah Mountain in Cleveland, Georgia, which was a very good feat. He had 12 children, and they all worked the land and were farmers and raised cattle, and he raised chickens and horses. And so my mother, which was his great great granddaughter, said that she never knew that they even thought of poverty because they always had chicken, they always had food, plenty of food to eat. Her mother and her grandmother made her clothes, and they taught her to sew. So they never had any idea that of poverty because they were dependent on the land and they lived very well off the land. And so that's my um, most memory, that the story that goes on that David had the 12 children, and one of his children was Doc. Doc, and I have the picture of Doc.
Yeah.
Doc is my great grandfather who who is here in the picture with Lila. And so this is a family portrait that goes around the family. Uh, Doc, Doc had also had 12 children, but he had two wives, and Lila was his second wife, and the first wife he lost in childbirth. And the family grew, and Maddie was his daughter, and Maddie was my grandmother, and Maddie was my mother's mother, which is Lorene, and then there came Miriam, Miriam or Layla
Yeah.
Johnson James Miller.
Awesome. So now we have that history going all the way from David Dorsey back in the early 1800s
Mm-hmm.
down to you.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some other notable family members and their stories?
Well, my mother had five sisters and brothers. Um, they were my Uncle Ernest, who was my grandmother's oldest. Well, I'll start with my Uncle John. My Uncle John, whose home was given to me, this home I live in now. He was actually my grandmother's, what some people will call a stepson, but she never referred to him as that. She only referred to him as her son, and she raised him. His mother, whose name was Cassie, uh, passed in childbirth with his sister, and so mortality for family for women having babies then was extremely high, and thank God we have things much better nowadays. And my Uncle John was the first, and then Uncle Ernest was the second, and then my mother Lorene, and then my Aunt Claudia, and then my Uncle Doc. He was named after Doc, the great grandfather's name. And one of the wonderful things that Maddie did was she was his dependent during the Korean War and World War II, and she would not spend the money that she received from the government as his dependent. She saved it up. She reasoned that he was going to need the money when he got out of service, so she would save it up so he would have something to live on while he was transitioning from military life to civilian life. And I thought that was very kind of her, because most folk just, spent their whatever was sent to them, but grandmother saved it up. And so to thank her for her concern for him and care for him and raising him as a child that was not her own, he purchased this home, this home here that I'm living in now. And he took excellent care of her, nurtured her as if she was his real flesh and blood. But the Bible does say, "Who is my mother, my brother, my father? He who does the will of my Father." And so thank God for Maddie.
So, yes, I would like to ask some more questions about this house. So you said that, you talked about how the house was acquired. What are some other things that, um, what are some important events that happened in this home? So this home was given to you by your Uncle John. What are some of the major events that happened here?
Well, some of the most notable things that happened, well, this was actually before I moved back to Atlanta. Um, well, originally Uncle John moved my mother and father and my sister and I to the home because he was still in the military. He was working at Walter Reed, and then he was working at Fort McPherson. And so he moved my mother and father in with my grandmother, because this was, at the time, 4-bedroom home. And so it was a large area for her. She was not too pleased with leaving Cleveland, Georgia. She would cry. I remember her crying because she was homesick for Cleveland, Georgia. And the reason he bought it next to a creek was because she would go to the spring every day to get her water that came off of Mount Yona. And clean water that came off the mountain. She'd go get her water from the spring. And it ran across the rocks, and I was always fascinated that they never were concerned about the water not being safe. It was just spring water coming down off the mountain, and buckets of water. And we'd go down to the spring and get water with her. And so one of the other, Uncle John would host weddings here, family members' weddings, different ones. I remember Ernestine's wedding. My sister Marquette's wedding was here. The Harris family had weddings here. He would host his classmates from Booker T. Washington High School, their reunions. He would have a party here for the reunion. And it's because the one reason these homes were purchased with such large areas, like the huge basements, is because black people couldn't go downtown to party. They would not have, nice, wholesome parties. But just to sit down and have a fellowship with their classmates, we couldn't go downtown to ballrooms at the Hyatt or the Regency. So, and that's why the homes in this area have finished basements, because the different ones that live in this area would host events in their homes. And so I guess that those were the most memorable things that happened here. Even with the family reunion, he would have family reunion meetings here, family reunion cookouts here. Uh, and Uncle John loved family reunions. He was one instrumental, Kaseyu, in the family reunion not falling apart because they used to have them during, before the civil rights movement. Actually, the white Dorseys and the black Dorseys would have a joint family reunion.
Interesting.
But after the civil rights movement, there was a separation of ways. And so Uncle John and John Hood in the family got the reunion started back up again in the 60s. And so we started traveling again and going to different cities again with the family reunion. And so he was very dedicated to his family. He had 3 wives. None of them had children, but he had brothers and sisters that had children. That was another reason he bought this size house, because he had one brother that had 6 children, another brother that had 6 children. If they wanted to come home Christmas, Thanksgiving, any of those times, they could bring all their children. And so he finished the basement. There were 4 bedrooms down there, and so it was just a very warm home.
So that explains why they had the bar down there in that large room, you know, so you could host and, you know, that makes so much sense, having the kitchens and things like that down there.
One of the things that happened in this home, once we moved here back in 1985, it was James' tradition to have the birthday parties downstairs, but you'd have to clean the basement to have the birthday party. And so they would do all the cleanup. The basement never looked like it did. The basement was always got cleaned up because there was a birthday every other month in the James family. Since I have 6, there was one every other month. And they would clean up to have their birthday party in the basement. So we'd have house parties and those are very memorable here.
Oh, awesome. Who is your favorite author to read?
I know he should know that. You already know the answer to that question. But my favorite book, because they can always ask me what is my favorite book, you know, on the internet, so they want the security question. But what is your favorite book? My favorite book is the Bible. So there are several authors. I love Psalms, but I love lots of books in the Bible, and I thank God for that. One of the scriptures he gave me when I was teaching at St. Mel in Chicago, when I was teaching there at 2nd grade, he gave me Romans 12. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice unto God, which is your reasonable service. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is the good, perfect will of God. And I think the mind is where we have to work out our soul salvation to make sure that our mind is in line with the will of God. And so, the Bible.
All right.
Okay.
Lee, you ask a question.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Go ahead. And one of the core values that I would like to pass down is that there is joy in serving a true and living God. I don't know about other people. All I know is about Miriam is that God has been good to me, and he's been good to mine. Look at this one here. He's been good from the crown of his head to the sole of his feet. He's been good to mine, and he's been good in my life. And I would like to pass the love of God to each of them. I am so glad that you're raising him and to know the Lord. Children may stray, children may go away, but they come back when the seed is planted. And so as you plant the seed, and I plant that seed too, and I challenge all of my children and grandchildren, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you. Thank you all so much.
She wants to hold the baby while you ask.
He's sleeping.
And he can sleep through it. We got him woke. And one of the core values that I would like to pass down is that there is joy in serving a true and living God. Um, I don't know about other people. All I know is about Miriam is that God has been good to me, and He's been good to mine. Look at this one here. He's been good from the crown of his head to the sole of his feet. He's been good to mine, and He's been good in my life. And I would like to pass the love of God to each of them. I am so glad that you're raising him and to know the Lord. Children may stray, children may go away, but they come back when the seed is planted. And so as you plant the seed, and I plant that seed and I challenge all of my children and grandchildren, seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you. Thank you all so much.